Wait. Here we go again.
Oh, wait a minute. What?
Same as last time. The Parliament I didn't have. Yeah, I put that up.
No, I mean, it's live.
Yeah. Because then I had it ready to play. Okay, we're back. We're actually on the Ides again.
Right?
Ides of
Ides of
January.
January.
We, of course, you can see by the, thought I took that off. We don't like Ike.
Mm-mm.
His slogan in 52 when he ran for president was "I like Ike."
Right.
on buttons and hats and stuff all over the place. But we're gonna look at his briefly his so-called big warning when he was leaving office in '61 and handing it over to Kennedy, his great military-industrial complex speech. But we're going to focus on it's not even half, but it's at the end of that speech, which a lot of people don't even mention.
Right.
Is he was talking about the
scientific
technological
technocratic elite.
Yeah. And we just want to, I was in positions of power going back into middle of World War II and then going into the 50s and him becoming president for 8 years and handing off to Kennedy, that we're going to show how he basically laid the foundations for a lot of what we have today. I mean,
and what he warned us about.
Supposedly, that's what I have a beef with Ike about, his warning to us. So
Right.
I was going to take a quick look at his speech in the Oval Office that day. Where did you go? Here you are. So he did the military industrial complex part, and then he transitioned into the scientific part of it.
Technocratic elite.
And so let's see. I had it up. I had it queued up. Hang on. Give me just a moment.
I have it too.
I had it right here. Yeah. Akin to and largely responsible for the sweeping changes in our industrial military posture has been the technological revolution during recent decades. And he says in this revolution, research has become central. It also becomes more formalized, complex, and costly. A steadily increasing share is conducted for, by, or at the direction of the federal government, which, thanks to you, buddy.
Right.
Today, the solitary inventor tinkering in a shop has been overshadowed by task forces of scientists in laboratories and testing fields. In the same fashion, the Free University, historically the fountainhead of free ideas and scientific discovery, has experienced a revolution in the conduct of research. Partly because of the huge cost involved, a government contract becomes virtually a substitute for intellectual curiosity. Now, this is 61, folks. It's nothing new. For every old blackboard, there are now hundreds of new electronic computers. The prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded. Yet in holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific technological elite. It is a task of statesmanship to mold, to balance, and to integrate these and other forces, new and old, within the principles of our democratic system, ever aiming toward the supreme goals of our free society. It's a bunch of lofty slogans and stuff. It's not...
What he says right there, it is the task of statesmanship to mold, to balance, and to integrate these and other forces, new and old, within the principles of our democratic system.
Yeah.
That's what he did.
He did.
He
And
integrated.
We're going to lay the case that going back into his leadership in World War II, that he laid the foundations for all of this. And it even stretches into the student loan program today.
Right.
And how, he funneled the money, he funneled the contracts, he made it law basically in a bunch of areas too. So we can start with, Supreme Allied Commander.
Well, let's start.
A lot of stuff started
the
before
idea,
him.
and we've talked about this before, about these generals having a mythos about them that is not really.
Yeah, we were
true.
talking about the false nostalgia we have for just a lot of things, our media, our government, and the myths of our generals. We've touched on previous broadcasts like Norman Schwarzkopf, Stormy
Right.
Norman, and his history and with his dad and stuff. So, yeah, Ike never faced combat.
But whenever you hear of him today, everything about him is like, he's the guy that warned us about the military and industrial complex. And then when you start reading about him and reading the background, and first of all, you realize that he's this storied general, you see all the medals on his uniform.
You know how we talked about this right before that people like to do comparisons between Ike and General Milley today, who's the Joint Chiefs of Staff chairman. And Milley never faced combat either, but Milley has this chest full of ribbons and never been in combat. And people like to, part of the myth of Eisenhower, he wasn't, drawing attention to himself. He wasn't a braggart or anything like that. And so he's got this when he's a 3-star. He ended up as a 5-star general.
Right.
But, as a 3-star, this is his chest of ribbons, which is, not a lot. But people say, oh, look how much more humble and, not full of himself like Millie is. Well, here's another picture of Ike.
Now, when you see those medals, keep in mind that he never saw 1 ounce of active war.
Never saw combat.
He never saw combat.
Supposedly, when we were getting involved in World War I, the units that he was assigned to, I think it was a couple of times he was trying to get to the front of World War I to get into combat, but each time his unit would be sent and deployed.
Right.
But he would be sent, ever closer to DC for his whatever maybe college grooming would be for.
And he's known for, he didn't really want to be president. That people lobbied for him to be president nominated.
Starting in
but
48.
you don't get elected to president 2 times because you didn't want.
Yeah, he was a reluctant king, so to speak. But so in World War II, towards the end, 44, 45, there's a couple of things we want to touch on. We talk about defeating the Nazis, most people know now about Operation Paperclip,
right?
About and that was also what is overshadowed in that is it was all about the scientists and the rockets and stuff like that, and Werner von Braun and his brother, and
not losing all that knowledge
But we throughout Europe smuggled all these Nazi scientists and stuff. But another half, just like with his speech, focusing on military industrial, they don't talk about there were a lot of doctors. So did we get an infusion in the Federal Health Service from a lot of Nazi doctors?
Right.
That did a lot of shady stuff.
That would explain all the twisted
stuff
experimentation.
Eisenhower didn't personally run Operation Paperclip, but he was Supreme Allied Commander, so he had to have been in the know that we were, grabbing these thousands of scientists and doctors, and sending them to the U.S. because we wanted to make sure we could compete with the Soviet Union in that sphere.
Right, and here he is. He's warning people about the military-industrial complex when he was the first Allied Supreme Commander for NATO. So he was at the beginning. He helped create NATO. NASA.
He set up NASA after the Soviets supposedly put a satellite in orbit in 56, so 57. So NASA's formed. Also, the National Defense Education Act in 57 was in response to the Soviets' so-called technological advances. Right. And they funnel all this money to universities, and that's where the student loan program begins. And, they wanted to do loans and grants. He cut out the grants. Well, he didn't do that part, but it was supposedly between the Senate and the House, they had different versions about how this would happen and funneling money and, encouraging mathematics and sciences and stuff and getting more people, because part of that was in 57, they could no longer rely on immigrants from Europe to supply the number of mathematicians and scientists and stuff that we needed to compete with the Soviets. And so they, during the Senate and the House reconciliations and finalizing of the bill, they completely dropped grants and made it strictly student loans. So where we're at now with that boondoggle.
Right.
So that starts with Ike. What was that?
I think the dog.
Oh. There were just so much. He laid the foundation for this stuff.
Right. Another thing that Eisenhower is known for is making sure that people didn't forget the horrors of the Holocaust. But we found it curious that
a couple of things that he did at the close of the Second World War, he made sure, he said, we need to make sure to document this because I know that there are going to be deniers in the future. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You got cameras everywhere all the time.
Right.
And some of them, I don't know, we're not going to question too much.
No, but when you look at some of the films that I went and looked at, it looked like a Hollywood production with the music and the presentation. And seeing them rewrite history live now, it just has me wondering.
It's just curious
what really went on.
And then also when he was military governor of the American sector of occupied Germany. So, Germany was occupied by Britain, France, the U.S., and Soviet Union. That's where you get East and West Germany. But the U.S. sector, Ike was the first military governor. He did so. It was a weird thing, and I haven't looked into it really far, but he changed the designation of POWs to disarmed enemy combatants or something like that. And it was to lower the threshold of how much they had to feed them, because apparently, supposedly because of so many prisoners of war and the Geneva Conventions of having a certain standard of how much you got to feed them and stuff and treat them. They had to lower the standard because the infrastructure being destroyed, they couldn't meet that standard. So they lowered it. And then Britain had a different term for theirs. I don't know what France did.
Right.
But then at the close of the war too, as they're marching through Germany and occupying different towns, Henry Kissinger pops up as a private in the U.S. Army. And this is a private U.S. Army that is actually administering some of these towns as they go along. He's running the towns that they occupy. I just wonder how a private Kissinger is. We haven't looked real far into that. Just rabbit holes are rabbit holes, and sometimes it just
we could probably delve on that.
Sometimes it's good to stop
some other time. But Eisenhower has this mythos of was he a 4-star general or 5-star?
He ended up 5-star
general, never seeing any combat. So you wonder what those medals were. He was the first Supreme Allied Commander for NATO. We now know that NATO, they told us that NATO was created, for peace, but it's actually a war machine. There's your military-industrial complex. Military-industrial complex and NATO are hand in hand.
Yeah. And one of the beefs I have with Ike is this great awakening that he gave the American people, and this warning he gave us is, dude, you were president for the last 8 years.
Right.
But you set in motion all of the things that made it even stronger and funneled more money and just made the whole train start happening.
Right. He was president of Columbia University for 6 years, which they say
no prerequisites for that.
Yeah, no prerequisites for that. And just a little trivia on that. Columbia University was founded in 1754 as King's College by King George III of England. Mm-hmm. And, that just kind of makes me wonder about the whole Revolutionary War.
I remember in England,
the
Revolutionary War. And the final flag of the British East India Company from 1801 onward.
So it makes you wonder, did we actually win the Revolutionary War?
But here's the flag that George Washington, the Continental Army fought under, 1776, 77, before Betsy Ross, just a reminder. So this doesn't need to be a really long one. We keep touching on World War II related things with all what's happening today, because you can go back to the 1871 with DC being formed and stuff, but you get in I think America was still America, in a large part, at least with.
And then a lot happened there after the war.
But you can get into the 1913 with Jekyll's Island, and then the World War I happening and what happens there. But we just believe World War II was such a catalyst for so many things, so many events, structures, the foundation for so many things now. And in the changing of people's minds and how, even in World War II, in 42, 6 months after Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt had to set up an agency that dealt with information and actually made all
the War of Information.
The information, I can't remember the name of it, but just leading up into the Battle of Midway, another part of the fake nostalgia or the myth of World War II is that the attack of Pearl Harbor galvanized the American public.
Right.
At first they were, we don't want to get involved. This is not our fight. But then Pearl Harbor happens, and now we want to just go kick butt around the world. And that is not actually the case.
It's not the case. And then after Truman was president?
Well, even before that, Roosevelt has set up this information agency. and a main reason is to help convince the American people of why we're supporting the Allies and why we're in this war. And I mean, the American people didn't even like Germany. I mean, Britain, and France. I mean, who are these people? So that was a myth as well. And the cooperation with all the major studios. They all ran their scripts through this agency before they would put their movies out. And
scripts is a good term because when you think of NASA and Walt Disney and Stanley Kubrick, and you start to wonder if it's all just part of the Truman Show. But Eisenhower and his warnings on the military-industrial complex and the scientific, technocratic elite, technological elite, he had a plan in place called the continuity of government. It was a group of 3 federal government officials and 6 private U.S. citizens that were secretly tasked by the president in 1958 to serve as federal administrators in the event of a national emergency.
And this is not something that's out there. We found it today, actually.
Right. It was top secret. I've never heard it talked about. And here's who was on this part of this continuity of government. Theodore F. Koop, who was then vice president of CBS, and he would be in charge of Emergency Censorship Agency, so propaganda to the American people. Frank Stanton, president of CBS, Emergency Communications Agency, he would help get that message out. John Ed Warren, senior vice president of First National City Bank, he would be in charge of Emergency Energy and Minerals Agency. You have the president of the Title Guarantee Company, president of Owen Corning's Fiberglass, chairman of the Federal Reserve. He would be in charge of the Emergency Stabilization Agency.
More fake nostalgia about back when the government wasn't in an incestuous relationship with the media. And, people talk about, they think the Clinton years started the, Stephanopoulos and all the marriage between, the marriage between media and government and the back and forth and all, out of one into another. It was happening here. And you look at his Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles.
Well, his cabinet was full of CEOs from Procter and Gamble,
General Motors. Kennedy carried
General
on
Motors,
that tradition. Kennedy's defense.
Long-time bank presidents. And
then you look at this. He's worried about us being a warmonger. We're supposed to be defense of liberty.
Right.
53, he instigates the revolution in Iran to get rid of Mossadegh, a popularly elected prime minister, to put the Shah in power.
The coups, in Iran
and
Guatemala.
And you look at Guatemala and its incestuous relationship with, John Foster Dulles, the Secretary of State, was the main planner of that operation to overthrow another democratically elected president. But supposedly he was getting too close to the communists, so he had to go. But the man who planned that coup with the Guatemalan military was John Foster Dulles, who used to be a lawyer for I just said it a little while ago, the fruit company.
Oh.
U.S. Fruit or something like that.
The bananas. I can't think of the name
of it. But then these 2 brothers, Cabot brothers, they were both senior executives, former executives for the same company, United Fruit Company.
Yeah.
And so this fake nostalgia that a lot of people have, and I used to have it about back, when Cronkite was just read the news. No,
right.
There's always been narrative. There's always been narrative.
And Eisenhower having this myth, especially among truthers that, he was exposing this stuff. No. He helped create and laid the foundations for most of it. And then at the, how they always have to tell you what they're doing. Then at the end of his 2 terms, he told you what they were doing.
So then you either, you accept it.
The proof in the pudding of that is that when you look at his actual, what he did to be 5-star general, what those medals were for. He didn't even see combat. He was president of Columbia University. What for? And as they said that he was a mostly absent. I figure he was president of Columbia University in much the same way that Obama was head of the Harvard Law Review. It's just these guys are puppets
And that's when that goes to our wondering if these, John Foster Dulles was his Secretary of State from 53 to 59, most of his 2 terms.
And we just have this
We
theory
just
that
wonder-
Secretary of States probably have more power and run things more so than the president. So anyway, these things are just something to consider. This wasn't
Just to
going to be
relook at it again.
a long stream. But this whole "I like Ike," that slogan, it has you repeating a positive about this guy that people really know nothing. All you know is what's been told to you, and just like everything else they've told you, it's a lie.
The reluctant king. He said when they first tried to get him to run for president in 48, he said he didn't think generals should be in that arena.
Right. And then he goes on to serve
I think that should be a
2 terms.
crossover that should happen.
Right. I would agree with him, but anyway, I think that's all we have.
Yeah, we wanted to try to keep this one short. We hit World War II a lot, but like I said,
I will just end on this one point that Eisenhower's grandson wrote in a memoir that Ike developed a kind of split personality about the most controversial speech of his life, downplaying its significance to old military and business friends while professing pride in it to others.
Right. And then I wanted to put one more tidbit in as well, is that he told his wife, Mamie, early in their marriage that his Army career would come first, always.
Yeah. Oh, great guy.
Also,
he said in that speech, he said that, and so this was back in his day, that the American military was spending more on defense than all of the net profits of all the U.S. corporations.
Or it was like the top 9 corporations or something.
He said all. So imagine what it is now in light of the fact that like Pentagon has missing trillions.
Where are those revenues coming from?
Right.
We know it's
a lot of the revenues comes from the federal government just turning on the printer. But anyway,
I think that's it. We get involved in of the world things with this broadcast, but we always want to end with our battle is not against flesh and blood.
Yeah, and I like your what was the one saying, the last one you had about exposing
that guy right there,
deception, or
Thomas Paine,
to expose delusion and error. Delusion, I'd say not so much error.
As far as your ability extends.
Right.
And your discernment and everything else.
And it's fun to do, knowing that everything they've told us is a lie. So
we love history. I'm not wedded to things I thought I knew before. So I always like to
no sacred cows or
try to discern what there is truth there. It has to have a ring to it or we wouldn't be attracted to it. So just praying to God and trying to get discernment and seeing it in a different light.
Yeah. So we're going to try to do our Ides next month on this at the same time.
We're going to go further back this time and not hang on World War II. We're going to look at Mr. Lincoln.
Yeah.
Lincoln and the Civil War, and just take another look at that. Other people have done this as well. We're not the first to do it by any means, but we think we might have some different takes on it. So hopefully see you guys next month.
All right.